There's a period romance show that's better than Bridgerton, better than Outlander, and almost nobody's seen it. And no, it's not Pride and Prejudice. Here are the 15 best period romance shows ever made. Amazon Prime had something special with My Lady Jane and they just canceled it. One season, that's all we got. The show took place during the Tudor era, which normally means dark and depressing kind of television. Except My Lady Jane went the opposite direction. It was uplifting, it had heart, and it threw in fantasy elements that made the whole thing feel fresh. There were people who could turn into animals. The main character, Jane Grey, and her love interest Guilford had this chemistry that you just don't see on TV very often. The show is based on a novel, but there's only one book. No sequels, no continuation of Jane's story. So, if they'd gotten a second season, the writers would have had to come up with everything themselves. And based on what they did in Season 1, they could have pulled it off. There was plenty of drama to mine, and Anna Chancellor was doing brilliant work in a supporting role. But Amazon looked at all of that and decided to cancel it anyway. Before Catherine of Aragon became King Henry VIII's first wife, she was just a young woman from Spain trying to figure out how to survive the English court. The Spanish princess follows her arrival from Spain in her courtship with the young king, and the show got praised for something period pieces usually ignore. It focused on people who historically get left out of these stories. It ran for 2 seasons and managed to pull real drama out of the history. The show definitely played fast and loose with historical accuracy. They dramatized Catherine's life and invented things that probably didn't happen, but that wasn't really the point. The Spanish princess was more interested in what the story meant than in being a faithful documentary about Henry and Catherine's relationship. And it looked gorgeous. Even though everyone watching knew the marriage was going to end in disaster, the show gave you plenty of romantic moments along the way. You got to see why they fell for each other before everything went wrong. The original Poldark came out in 1975 and became a classic. In 2015, they brought it back, and the revival actually lived up to the original. Both versions are based on Winston Graham's books about Ross Venner Poldark, who comes home to England after fighting for the British in the American Revolutionary War. Most period dramas that cover the Revolutionary War focus on espionage or political intrigue or what's happening in the colonies. Poldark took you back to Cornwall, to these sweeping moors, and showed you what happened to the people who came home. Ross returns to find his family's estate falling apart and has to rebuild everything while the country's changing around him. And he falls in love with Demelza, who starts out as a maid in his house. The show took its time with that, let it develop naturally. Poldark ran for 5 seasons and stayed one of Masterpiece's most acclaimed dramas the entire time. When they were casting the Tudors back in 2007, they made a choice that nobody saw coming. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers as King Henry VIII. Not exactly the first person you'd think of for that role. The whole cast was full of surprises, actually. You had a very young Henry Cavill in there, and Natalie Dormer playing Anne Boleyn. Rhys-Meyers made Henry into this character you actually got invested in, even though the guy was a complete womanizer and honestly kind of a terrible person. You watched him genuinely fall in love across the seasons, which shouldn't be possible for someone who went through wives like that. The show got a lot of history wrong. They weren't shy about taking liberties with the facts, but somehow it worked. Before Olivia Cooke was Allison in House of the Dragon, she played Becky Sharp in the Amazon version of Vanity Fair. And before Claudia Jessie was Eloise in Bridgerton, she played Amelia in that same show. The story's based on this William Makepeace Thackeray book from the 1800s about class and what it cost to climb the social ladder. Reese Witherspoon did a movie version back in 2004, but the miniseries really let the story breathe. What made it interesting was watching these 2 women go in completely opposite directions with love. Amelia opened her heart too much, trusted too easily, and got destroyed for it. Becky basically couldn't let anyone in at all, couldn't be vulnerable even if she wanted to. Both of them suffered because of it, just in different ways. Korean dramas do period romance differently, and The King's Affection might be the best example of why that works. There's a woman who has to pretend to be her brother, the crown prince. It's not a fun disguise situation. If anyone finds out, she's dead. Her mother's dead. Everyone's dead. So she's living this incredibly high-stakes lie while dealing with all the politics of the Joseon dynasty court. Then a guy shows up and falls in love with her while she's pretending to be the prince, which creates this massive forbidden romance where she can't even acknowledge what's happening because she's supposed to be a man. Netflix picked it up for international distribution in 2021, which is how most people outside Korea got to see it. The production value on this thing was incredible. The sets, the costumes, the way they brought the Joseon dynasty to life, it made the whole romance feel epic. Jane Austen died before she could finish Sanditon, just left behind an incomplete manuscript, and for years, nobody knew what to do with it. Then Masterpiece decided to take what she'd written and finish it themselves. Most Austen adaptations are locked in. You know how Pride and Prejudice ends, you know how Emma ends. Nobody knew where Sanditon was supposed to go, so the writers could do whatever they wanted. The main character is Charlotte, and in Season 1, she's got this enemies to lovers thing going with a guy played by Theo James. He's arrogant, she's got a sharp tongue and won't back down from anyone, and they clash constantly. Their chemistry is fantastic. Sanditon also gets more physical than most Austen adaptations. The kissing scenes, the displays of affection, they're more modern, less buttoned up. Probably because they're not strictly following what Austen wrote, they can show what she might have only hinted at. This is a 2002 adaptation of a George Eliot novel, and Hugh Dancy plays the lead. Daniel Deronda is basically torn between two different lives. On one side, there's Gwendolen. She's aristocratic, connected to English high society, and she's trapped by it. She makes these huge sacrifices to maintain her family's social standing because that's just what you did in the late 1800s. Daniel cares about her, maybe loves her, and she represents the world he's always known. On the other side, there's Myra. She's connected to the family Daniel lost when he was young, to parts of his background he's been trying to understand. And he falls for her even though it means turning away from everything he's been living. So the love triangle is really about who Daniel wants to be. It's not as well known as other period romances. George Eliot isn't Austen or the Brontes, but the cast is excellent and it goes places most period romances don't. Bridgerton premiered on Netflix in 2020 and became huge immediately. Unlike most period romances that do one season and disappear, Bridgerton's got 8 siblings in the family, so each season focuses on a different one finding love. The show doesn't shy away from sex. It's treated as part of romantic love, desire, physical intimacy, all of it shown as something healthy and beautiful instead of cutting away with a fade to black. Season 3 had this whole thing about being in love with someone while still maintaining your own identity. You don't have to disappear into marriage and lose yourself. Bridgerton keeps being one of Netflix's biggest hits because each season gives you something different. New love story, new drama, new steamy scenes. But you still get the gorgeous costumes and the sweeping romances people showed up for in the first place. It's the show everyone's already seen. Outlander started simple. Woman touches some stones in Scotland, gets zapped back to the 1700s, meets a hot Scottish guy named Jamie. Standard time travel romance. Except it's been running for years now and it's turned into this massive thing. There's political conflicts between the British and the Scottish, characters traveling across the world, multiple generations getting caught up in wars and survival. There's magic, there's real history, there's all of it happening at once. But Claire and Jamie are still the center, and the show figured out early that the most devastating thing you can do is separate them across time. It's still going, still popular. Critics keep saying it balances the politics and the romance without dropping either one. You'd think a show about Emily Dickinson would be quiet and proper and very serious about poetry. But Dickinson is none of those things. Haley Steinfeld plays Emily, and the show is about her relationship with Sue Gilbert, her best friend and her lover. Sue marries Emily's brother, which complicates things, but it doesn't stop them. Their connection runs through the whole series. It's not your typical period drama, though. It looks like one, but then characters will say something completely modern, or something magical happens that shows how Emily sees the world. The show does this on purpose. It's not trying to be accurate about every historical detail. It's trying to capture who Emily Dickinson actually was. A lot of what happens isn't historically true, but it matches Emily's spirit. And that matters more. The Great is about Catherine the Great taking power in the 18th century Russia, except it's loosely factual, which means they made up whatever they wanted. Elle Fanning plays Catherine. Nicholas Hoult plays her husband, Emperor Peter III. They're incredible together, enemies, then friends, then lovers, all while Catherine is plotting to kill him. Catherine shows up at court as a naive young woman. 2 episodes later, she's planning her husband's murder because he's terrible at being emperor. But then something shifts. Catherine realizes Peter's awful at ruling, but there are parts of him she actually likes. She softens. He becomes more than just the guy she needs to overthrow. That's where the romance happens. It's messy and complicated and built on attempted murder. Basically, it's a dark comedy about a historical period that was already messed up. But between all the shocking stuff and the humor, there are real emotional moments that catch you off guard. Queen Victoria ruled England for most of the 1800s, one of the longest reigns in the country's history. But what people forget is that she had this incredibly romantic marriage. That was basically unheard of for royalty at the time. Most royal marriages back then were political arrangements. You married who you were told to marry, had kids to continue the bloodline, and that was it. Victoria actually fell in love with Prince Albert. They had a real relationship, which was wild for the Victorian era. The show follows their courtship through their later years together, right up until Albert dies suddenly. Jenna Coleman plays Victoria, and she nails the transition from a young woman falling in love to a queen who knows how to handle politics and power. Her chemistry with Tom Hughes, who plays Albert, is what makes the whole show work. Without that relationship feeling real, there's no emotional hook. The series doesn't really criticize Victoria much. It paints her in a pretty flattering light. But it does show some of the political and social chaos happening during her reign. And honestly, people aren't watching for historical accuracy. They're watching because the love story is aspirational. A powerful queen who actually got to marry someone she loved, even if it ended in tragedy. Period romance shows have always had their audience, but Downton Abbey did something different. The show ran for 6 seasons and then got multiple movies after that. It follows this aristocratic English family, the Crawleys, during a time when the whole system they lived in was falling apart. The monarchy was losing power, strict social classes were ending, and the 20th century was bringing massive changes. Much of the show focuses on the romantic lives of the 3 Crawley daughters, and what made Downton Abbey so huge was that it felt like a modern drama, just with fancy costumes and elaborate sets. The daughters pushed boundaries for their conservative time period and ended up with unexpected partners. The show let them make choices that would have been scandalous. Before the 2005 movie with Keira Knightley, there was the BBC miniseries with Jennifer Ehle and Colin Firth. And for years, this was considered the definitive version of Pride and Prejudice. The 1995 adaptation doesn't have the budget or polish of a feature film, but it completely immerses you in the period. It focuses on Elizabeth Bennet's romance with Mr. Darcy, but also her intelligence and how fiercely she loves her family. The pacing is slower and more deliberate than what people expect if they've only seen the movie, but that's actually its biggest strength. As a miniseries, Pride and Prejudice had time to include all these smaller character moments and developments that a 2-hour film has to skip over. The adaptation is incredibly faithful to Jane Austen's text. It doesn't try to modernize anything or add drama that isn't there, it just trusts the source material. The show won awards at both the BAFTAs and the Emmys, and decades later, people still consider it the best version of this story. It made viewers fall in love with Elizabeth and Darcy's world all over again.